Siri, start a 2-minute timer.
Good morning. Welcome to Apple Park.
So the Apple event was today, and they announced a couple of new iPads, and of course they announced new Apple Pencils like we kind of thought that they would. And so I wanted to talk about something that I think a lot of people are missing about the iPad. In particular, I follow a lot of people in the kind of like nerd tech space. Big surprise coming from me, right? And one of the things that they often say in that space is that the iPad doesn't need hardware upgrades, that the hardware is not the issue, right? I think that that is deeply misguided. In particular, their complaint is that, the iPad has the same CPU as the Mac, so why can't it do Mac-like things? There's some people who staunchly advocate for the fact that iPad is a very different platform, but still the vast sentiment is that just iPadOS isn't powerful enough. Now, I think that is true for a particular group of people. For the people who are saying it, it's obviously true. It's not doing what they want. But the iPad is a platform unto itself, separate from macOS, despite sharing so many of the underpinnings, down to the silicon that it runs. The iPad harnesses that silicon in a different way. Remember, Apple differentiates hardware using software. That's true for their devices versus other companies, so between phones, between tablets, between computers and laptops, but it's also within their own product lineup. Software differentiates hardware, not the other way around. Now, of course, hardware differences make differences in what the software can do, which is kind of what is happening with the iPad being a touch-first device. The other day we talked about input resolution in particular, right? The iPad has a particular input resolution because the finger is the lowest common denominator for that input. But that doesn't mean that it can't run macOS. It's just that I don't think it needs to. And it's not in Apple's business interest to do it, right? And so why would they do that? Well, if it doesn't fit the experience that they want to have, and you could argue that that experience that they want just conveniently fits their business interests, which it does, but that doesn't mean that it's a straight win or a compromiseless win or an untainted win to just throw macOS onto an iPad. It adds complexity, it adds a weight. There's lots of trade-offs that are involved in doing that I just don't think are worth it. In particular, the thing that stands in Apple's favor is that they are far and away the best tablet out there. There's really no competition for them. And it's such a good tablet that it's actually becoming a computer replacement for a lot of people, because guess what? Most people don't need the heaviness of macOS. Just because we started in a world with this very open platform with a lot of heavy flexibility and this very precise input device doesn't mean that every person in the world needs that anymore. In fact, I would argue that most people, for most purposes, probably don't need a laptop anymore in most cases. They could get away with a phone and an iPad in almost every scenario. So today, I want to talk to people in my life that are surveying the iPad as an option for their next main computing platform other than their phone. They come from very different places in their lives. They come from very different realms, but you'll notice some common themes. In particular, that the iPads and its accessories make it an acceptable replacement for these people's laptop. And these people, despite their different backgrounds in technology, are all coming to the point where they are converging on the iPad as their potential next device. I think that this is more common than a lot of the tech press gives it credit for, and I don't think it's a coincidence that in the last 5 years, I have recommended the iPad more than I've recommended the MacBook for most people's next computer. So I want to know, well, first of all, you are gonna buy an iPad.
I think so.
And you're the only person that I have asked that has never owned an iPad, right? You're not the only person that I have talked to that does not currently use an iPad. So what I want to know is how you got to the point where you're considering buying an iPad as your main computer, because really it's going to be your computer.
Yeah.
Like, how'd you get to this point?
So even as I became an Apple user and had a MacBook Pro, and then eventually, I mean, just you're kind of seeing the trend here. It got smaller and smaller to the point where I had a MacBook Air. I always had my desktop computer. So why I'm considering an iPad, what's funny on the flip side of things, I bought the iPhone when it first came out.
Yeah.
I love the convenience of it, but it wasn't an iPad, and it definitely was no computer. But over time, it got so good where it kind of became like a handheld computer. And the reason I'm now considering my whole entire workflow is because I'm tired of having a desktop, a laptop, my phone, and I do have iPads I never use. And and one additional point, just for security, like having one central device where everything lives, and that's my portal, and really transitioning to where all the other monitors are just that. It's just a place for my computer to plug into, and ultimately the iPad, kind of, especially with the new updates you told me about it, potentially becoming my one device.
The first time I remember iPads being like introduced in our family, at least, or to my own brain, I guess, was when my sister Emma, our sister Emma, got her iPad for 10th Street, which, I don't know, should I elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Like, our middle school, 10th Street, started introducing iPads, and so all the kids got an iPad, and that's what we'd use to take notes and just like any of the tasks. Like, I remember using it for band, and we had like an app, and it would measure like the accuracy of whether you put the note right or like long enough.
I totally
which
forgot
honestly,
about that.
that was the bane of my existence. I hated that so much, and I swear it was wrong half the time. Like, I would do the same like simple song over and over again. I hated it, but anyway. So yeah, and then when I went in 10th Street, I got my iPad, and so I got to experience that, and I was mostly using it for like note taking and planning and just normal like school stuff. I remember, like, I think as soon as I was introduced to the iPad, I was really excited about like the drawing feature of drawing and note taking. I remember us getting styluses for the first time, and I was like really like interested in that, and I just was like something that my brain like fixated on, and I like always wanted to be like doodling on there. And I have like notes in my Notability app from like 6th grade of me just like in class doing whatever doodles and like using all the little tools. Like, there's like the little selection tool, and then you can change colors. So I just, any way that I could like make my little creative brain be satisfied by that. Like,
That stylus too, that was not even an Apple Pencil. It was just one of the ones that had like the plastic tip, right? And then you would like go and it would like just pretend like it was your finger.
Yeah, I think our first ones, like, it had the little plastic tip, and then we got the ones with the little glass. There was like a little glass thing on the end, and those I was obsessed with for some reason. Like, just the smoothness of it gliding.
And you could see the tip too. It was better because then those other. Actually, it was. I'm remembering now. They were like the little rubber ones initially because they were like the size of your finger, a little smaller. And then the other one had that little glass tip, and it had like a point that went to the very bottom, and it like would work. It would feel more like an actual pencil. It would be like more precise, right?
Yeah. I just was watching your video about the inputs and outputs. And that like rubbery tip one
Yeah.
really reminds me of like just your finger. It's like mushy and it's awkward and you
Yes.
don't know where the line's gonna end up. So it's like, I don't know. But once we got that metal one, I was like, yes, like this is what I'm looking for. So yeah, and out of middle school, I started using Chromebooks because that was sort of what was standard for our high school. But I think I continued to take notes on my iPad. I don't know that I did it as much, obviously, but like, I don't know. It's just like very convenient for like trying to find your notes and like having everything in one place and not losing things, I think. So that has been helpful for me. And then I think in high school is also when I started actually using it for art. Like, that's when I found Procreate, and I started drawing.
This was the same iPad that you were using in middle school, right?
Yeah, I had that one for a while, and then I think somewhere like mid-high school, I transitioned because Procreate stopped supporting my iPad.
Oh, really?
And so I couldn't actually use, like, I don't even know. I ended up losing a bunch of drawings, which was honestly my bad because they said to, like, back it up and stuff, and I was just being lazy about it. But anyway, yeah, I started drawing on that iPad. And actually, even before that, I remember having, like, an app on my iPad, and it was just, like, a little notebook, and you would just draw whatever in it, and there's like a bunch of notebooks and pages, and that was like a very basic app. But like once I found Procreate, that like unlocked like a whole bunch of things for me, because there's like all the different textures and tools. It was no longer like just one single, like you get pen, pencil, or a brush. Like, I don't know. So that was exciting for me, and it only being like $10, I was like,
Seriously?
yeah. And so I did that for a while. I did a lot of digital art. I sort of have leaned away from digital art, but I still like it, and I like using the iPad as a tool for like drafting things for stuff that I'm making that's physical when I'm in classes. And then I also have been going back to the iPad for note-taking, because stuff like good notes, like there's just, in terms of like studying, I can never find anything but on good notes, because you can search it up. I'm like, I have to do it now. Like, I can't like go back to physical notebooks. I've tried because I like the physical feeling of note-taking in a like actual paper, but yeah, I need to be able to go back and like reference things and like not have to look for it for like an hour. So, and like my computer journey is that, well, I've told you, I've never bought my own laptop, because I've been very lucky that my parents have just been giving me their hand-me-down laptops when they're finished with them. So all of mine have been really old, and it's not terrible, but they have to be plugged in all the time, right? And like, it's like huge. Like I have it in front of me, right? Like really big, and yeah, I don't know. I just don't. This one has a touch screen, so which is pretty nice, I guess. I've also broken a bunch of laptops. Like that's why I keep not buying them, because I just keep like, I stepped on one time and the screen broke, and then so like usually they're just old enough that I'm not even really breaking them. They just kind of die out on me. And I say that like I've had a bunch. It's been like 2 or 3. So yeah, so they've all kind of been old when they came to me, and then I kind of am like the last leg. And I had a 2-in-1 laptop a couple years ago in my freshman year of college, and I used that one to make art. So I would like do little like sketch pad things, because it was one like the screen and the keyboard disconnected, but it was the worst because they weren't very synced up, so you had to charge them separately, and it like when the keyboard didn't hold a charge for very long.
So I was like effectively only using it as a tablet, but it wasn't like a very good tablet.
Was it a Windows thing or an Android thing?
It was I think it was ASUS, so Windows.
So Windows, yeah, most likely, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so I've kind of been using a combination right now of this big chunky laptop and my computer from school, which is much nicer. It's the nicest one that I've had in a long time, but it's like obviously a work computer. But I've been using a combination. I've been like bringing both of them to like coffee shops with me. And so I have like a full backpack, just these two laptops that I just like spread out.
I didn't even think about this before we talked here, but I would argue the most important computer that you have right now is actually your phone. To you.
Yes, because it is really what I would just said my iPad could become, right? It's my portal. It's where everything all centralizes. Because all the other computers, including my desktop and laptop, I actually don't really store really that valuable of information because I'm not around it. Like there's like this mental like perception that because it's in my office or my studio or it's a laptop that sometimes I use and sometimes I don't, I always have my phone so I can literally keep my eyes on it.
So yeah, so I've gotten to the point because I had started using your iPad to like make digital art and like play on Procreate, and was like, this is so cool and fun. And also there's a lot of like art that I kind of like, I make zines, right? And so I want to, there's like specific functions that I want to do because I've been like uploading the zines online and just like taking photos of them basically. But I like doing them digitally, but I want them to have like more hand drawings in them and like handwritten parts. And I can't really do that. It's hard to do both, right? Like I make physical zines just like with paper and scissors and pencils and whatever, which they're great, but there's specific things that I want to have typed up or like images from online that I would like to use in them. And so it's kind of a combination of those two things where I would like to have both of those things. And I haven't really made a zine on your iPad before just because, well, I've worked on it. I've like started one, I think. I don't think I got super far in it, but it's tricky because I need all the different apps that I use for them, and I don't have them on yours.
But the reason I still want a device, whether it's a desktop, laptop, or an iPad, because I do want a bigger screen with a keyboard.
Yeah.
I want the keyboard. That's the one thing an iPhone doesn't have is a keyboard. And it's funny because I talk about two thumbs. It's like the worst way to type, even though we're so used to it.
Yeah.
Because I can type way faster with a keyboard, and I do kind of like the interaction physically of my finger to a key versus my thumb just to a screen.
You know, back when I made that original Superhuman Interface video, you made a great point after watching it. And you had mentioned that it's kind of like a pianist. Imagine that a pianist has to use just their two thumbs to play a beautiful song. Not going to happen, right? They're using all 10 fingers to make the music that they want to make.
You know the reason I told that to you? You know, I used to be in percussion in a band.
I didn't know that.
And when you're playing the xylophones, you use 2 mallets.
That's so true.
Now, if you're really good, you could use 4, but you're so limited by that compared to, you know, I remember because, you know, a xylophone has the same key structure as a piano.
Yeah.
But the pianist can play way more elegant songs and, you know, composers versus a percussionist, which I was, had 2 mallets, and that you were limited by that. So it's that plus my experience with my thumbs versus my fingers is why I said that.
Well, it's interesting to me because I think that it sounds like the thing that has convinced you of the iPad, and you kind of knew this from the beginning, was its art capabilities, right? That's kind of the hook, right? Is like, especially with the pencil, right? In particular, it becomes this tool that that's very flexible with what you can do, and like because you have a very broad range of art style or like art formats that you engage in, that you create, you end up doing. It becomes very useful to have a device like a computer that like it can adjust to that, right?
Yeah.
But then, oh yeah, you first.
No, just I have, because I've had one laptop where I really effectively did use it. Like I remember like going out onto the lawn. Like that's also a big thing is that like I cannot use my laptop outside.
Out in the world, yeah.
Pretty much, or in the world. Like, yeah, like I can go to a coffee shop as long as there's a charger, but like if there isn't a charger, I basically can use my laptop for like 10 minutes and then it dies. So I can't like go anywhere. I can't like do it outside. And what I used to do, like when I was in my freshman year and I had that tablet, I would like bring the tablet out and like work on it outside on the lawn with my friends or like things like that. And I really enjoyed that. And I also like, I had the capability of like doing video. I used to make a lot of videos too, which I don't even think I told you about that, but yeah, I used to make videos, but I haven't had software on my current laptop to do that, so I haven't done any of that.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if you do videos on the iPad, because I would say until recently it wasn't the greatest video editing thing, but they do have Final Cut for it now, so it'll be interesting to see whether or not it is something that is accessible on there and whether it's actually fully featured enough to like really actually make stuff with it. But
well, I'm not making videos like you're making videos. Like mine are a little bit more.
Still though, I mean, like in terms of like ease of use and in terms of like speed and things like that, like you can edit a video on your phone, right? But it's just like it's not the best experience in the world. It's not as flexible as like probably you're used to. Well, first of all, you might be interested in the new iPad Pro then, because the bigger, I don't know if it's the bigger one or at least the bigger storage size, they have a matte screen now, right? So I think that, I obviously I haven't tried it, but I'm curious to see if the pencil, when you use it on there, if it's more like paper, because it's like a matte texture instead of this glossy texture, right? And then of course you don't have as much glare and stuff. But anyway, wait, so the one you got in high school, did you use an Apple Pencil with that one? Because you have an Apple Pencil now, right?
Yeah, I have your old, just like first generation Apple Pencil, still kicking. But yeah, it's honestly like, I don't have any problems with it really. So the only thing that's annoying is it plugging into the bottom of my iPad. That's like the worst. I don't know.
It's interesting though that of course there's the art side, which I think is really one of the ultimate sales pitches for the iPad, right? Is that like such a flexible art device, right? And it's funny that you say you like to use it out in the world, because I've heard a lot of people in the tech sphere, like in the last few days, make fun of the event title today for the Apple event. Because it was called like Let Loose, and they're like, why is it called Let Loose? That same group of people are critiquing the actual the iPad in general, saying that hardware doesn't need upgrades, it's the software that needs an upgrade. The software needs an upgrade. I think that that's kind of like the focus of today's video, actually, is that I think that it's not that those people are in a tech bubble and that they have a very particular mindset of what people use computers for, because they're all tech people, right? They think that these things, and so like I think that the iPad is like the regular person or the real person's computer, not the tech nerd's computer in a lot of ways. And they're like, it's not a general purpose computing platform. I'm like, it really is though, for most people. Like I think about the last, I don't know, 5 years, and I've recommended the iPad more than I've recommended the MacBook to people, right? And so obviously I've recommended it to you, partially because you're also like in the education world, and I really think that the iPad is like the ultimate teacher's device for so many different reasons. I used it all the time when I was a teacher as a whiteboard. Like even in the last video, I like kind of replicated what I would do in the classroom by using my iPad as the whiteboard instead of having to go up and actually using like a marker and stuff like that. So I think that that is where your story gets very interesting, because of course it's great for the art, and actually I think that it'll be a huge unlock for you in particular for the art. But I would guess that if it was just the art alone, you wouldn't be as willing to buy the iPad as someone who's price conscious about what you're spending your money on when it comes to a computer, and that you need that additional reason, which is the productivity side in this case for teaching or for the education world. Is that right? Or am I kind of making things up?
No, I agree. I think a lot of it has to do with that too. Like in terms of, I think it would be really interesting. It's hard for me right now to visualize it as a teaching tool because I'm a paraeducator, I'm not a teacher. And so like it would be, there are moments that I'm teaching during my day that I could definitely use it, but right now I'm not doing a lot of planning. So like right now, but I'm obviously hoping to teach in the future. So
but even like email though, right? Like
email. Something that I'm thinking about too is like, even as it comes to like preparing teaching stuff, like I like use Canva and I've been using like all these different formats of things. And I think one of the biggest things that I've been thinking about is like the flexibility of being able to like, I don't know, like right now I just feel like I don't want to work on certain things that I need to when it comes to like my applications or my whatever, because my laptop is so annoying to use.
Yeah.
It like stops me from like, I like don't use I use my computer more now in the last couple of months than I have in a long time. But like, I probably use my laptop like, well, for sure way less than you, but like probably less than a normal, like an average person who has one, because it's kind of bulky and annoying to use and like slow. And so I'm just like, I'd rather not. Like, I'll use my phone if I need to use something.
You are an interesting use case because you're sort of very similar to me, although obviously you lean more into the art side than I do, like the digital art side. But you're kind of two roles that would be like artist and student, right? And I definitely agree with you that like GoodNotes like was life-changing for me, because that was like when I was I'm the type of student who writes everything down, and then I like forget everything, and I want to like go back later and be able to find things, right?
Yeah.
So it's huge. And it's so important, and I like lose everything, and then so I first of all agreed on that front. But on the art side of things, in terms of the iPad, you said that you've been using it as like a drafting device essentially in your BFA program in particular at Western, or what?
I haven't used it so much for the BFA.
Okay.
But I have used it in like my art classes.
Okay.
Like in particular, we had like a katazome. We're like making designs on fabric, but you sort of have to plan it out because you make a stencil first. And so I use my iPad for that. Just, I don't know. It makes it like simple. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah. Oh, wait, did you use that, like, in terms of, like, because how does that print end up working in the end? Like, what do you actually do?
You end up, like, okay, so you have the stencil, and then you put the rice paste, and then that goes on all the places that you cut out. So you put that over it, and then you lift up the stencil, and it has the design. But it's easier for me to do that kind of stuff on my iPad, because then I can put the stencil or like the stencil paper over it, and then I can trace it on my iPad.
Interesting. Like a light box.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like a light box. And just like making ideas. I also did one for like screen printing, and I was trying to line up the edges and stuff. So I don't know. Sometimes it's just easier to do stuff on the iPad that, like, if I was to try to do it on, like, analog, like, it would be difficult.
It'd be more, like, time-consuming, basically, because you'd have to actually do the physical copying of things or, like, moving of things, right?
Exactly, yeah.
When you go to your desktop, or when you were to go to your laptop beforehand, as opposed to your phone, what are the main, like, things that you're doing there now that you can't do on your phone, or that you'd rather do on those desktops or laptops rather than on the phone?
Oh, definitely writing something. Hence the keyboard.
Exactly.
Just literally writing something out. That's what's fascinating about the audio dictation, is you would think that's better, but there's something about thinking and talking that's harder than thinking and typing.
You're totally right, yeah.
I never thought of it until right now. But when you're thinking, you literally all your bandwidth is just dedicated to the thought, and then you're telling your fingers what to do. Versus when you're thinking and talking, though it seems like it's easy enough. I don't know. For me, creatively, when I'm just writing something or notes, that's what I'm doing on my desktop or laptop that I don't do. I prefer not to do on my phone, though, of course, you can do it.
Yeah.
I'd say the other thing, too, is just watching something. I consume a lot of content on my phone, but when I want to watch a movie or a show, I definitely almost cringe at the idea of, like, watching anything on my phone. And the visual part is important. So, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, because we haven't talked about this, but ultimately the TV is a place for me.
Interesting.
The TV is where I'd want to watch everything that visually is compelling in terms of that type of content. So yeah, those are the two things. Watching things and writing things are things that I don't like to do on my phone if I can have the choice.
You've looked at the kind of new pencil and the new iPads and things like that, and a lot of, I mean, like you said, you watched my video, and you're watching my video, and the a big thing for me, I'm thinking about the use of precision tools, right? And I think about art in particular, obviously, and actually as a student too, it was very important to have like a pencil instead of having that like chubby like stylus that you were talking about. Was there a big improvement between the like glass tip one and like Apple Pencil, or is it pretty similar for you? Like what are the important factors, and like was the Apple Pencil actually a big improvement for you?
I would say, yeah. I mean, I think Procreate is the main thing. Being a student, like, I don't have to have anything super fancy.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Procreate, like, having the, like, be able to turn on the side for, like, the shading or pressing harder for, like, thicker lines, like, being able to do that kind of stuff that you would be able to do with, like, a pencil, an actual pencil, makes a big difference, you know, because you can kind of replicate that with just like a normal stylus or your finger, but it would take like a lot of time. And I feel like that's one of the things I've been most excited looking at the new Apple Pencil, like the rotating thing. Like, I'm sure it'd make like a big difference, but like I was thinking about like calligraphers, because like the way that your pencil is facing, like I'm sure that makes like a big difference.
It's really interesting to me to hear you say that, because the reason I'm asking these questions is that today the big thing that I see from a lot of people, like the sentiment in the tech community, is that, oh, the iPad is hamstrung, there's no reason to upgrade the hardware because the software is too limited. But I think that that's short-sighted. They're in the tech bubble, right? And most people in the tech bubble are like, I want to be able to do everything with everything. And while that would be great, there are some compromises that they'd have to make. And I think the reality is that like the iPad ultimately, like I realized in the last 5 years, the computer that I have suggested most to the people in my life is the iPad. It's not a Mac, actually, which is a market shift from beforehand. Like people will come to me and ask me, which computer should I get? And I actually tell people, don't get a laptop. Get an iPad instead. And it's a very weird thing to get to this point where, first of all, some people are coming to me and saying, should I get an iPad actually instead? But more interestingly, even for me, I'm like, actually an iPad would be better for you in a lot of ways.
Can I tell you one more additional reason that you made me think of as why I use a desktop or laptop?
Yes, please.
It is the user interface. I am the guy that's so nostalgic on my Windows PC. I moved the start button back to the bottom left because I'm so used to it. So there's this thought of, because I grew up in that generation, I'm just comfortable navigating a computer. Now, you would think an iPad and the iOS operating system and the user interface is easy enough because you can pick it, but there's something about the way you navigate that is just so familiar to me that, you know, like you said, it's funny. When I think about using an iPad, you suggesting it as my go-to computer now, even if it has a keyboard, the fact that I can't navigate it with a mouse and a cursor, and I can't just hit, even like on Apple laptops, you know, you still have like an area where you can click and then it drops down menu. I'm even trying to think how a laptop works on a Apple computer. But does that make sense? The user interface for me, it's just the familiarity and the nostalgia of that, and I'm comfortable with it, versus a touch screen. You think that's like better, but I mean, think about this. I'm only as fast as my finger can be on the screen.
Yes.
Versus when I'm using a cursor similar to the keyboard, it's actually faster.
Totally.
Boom, 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 right? Like I can click, 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 versus my finger doing this.
Somebody in my cohort is animating, and I was watching the Apple video that you sent me.
With the Procreate CEO, actually.
Yeah, with the Procreate CEO. And, just that kind of thing, I feel like will make a big difference because, like, and especially in animating, like, you're having to do, like, a lot of switching between things. And, like, so, like, what was it? The pinching for, like, the tools or whatever.
Exactly.
Being able to make those quick adjustments, I feel like, will be a game changer.
Also, I've been thinking a lot about, because the reason that I'm willing, because other people have recommended like Lenovo or whatever, like different other things that you use for art, right? Like they're like, oh, why don't you just get this tablet, right? And for me, I think I actually am willing to spend more money on it being an Apple product because I want it to be seamless with my phone. That's been the biggest thing that's like pushed me over, because like right now when I am like, you've seen that, like, I'll use a lot of like reference images for my art, right? And so I'm like right now, and also just like text, like I'll have different pieces of writing and stuff that I'm like putting onto my blog. So I will like type things out onto my phone because it's easiest to use my phone, and then I email it to myself so that I can upload it from my computer. And so, like, my entire email inbox is just emails from me to myself of like different things, and it's so annoying. And I'm like, oh my god, it would just be so much easier if I could do things on my phone during school hours or whatever, or just like when I'm in bed and I don't want to be on a laptop, and then I can just pull up basically the computer and just have it already be like all the photos are already in my gallery. Does that make sense?
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. That's a huge appeal to me too. I mean, literally, a lot of people ask what I edit and film my videos with, and it's entirely Apple products, right? And it is like obviously not an ad, but it's really true. It just becomes the most convenient thing for me because I'm filming on my phone, I can preview on my iPad, and I can airdrop to my computer, and just all kind of ends up working in this way where I don't have to worry about a lot of the kind of like the previous things that would have been roadblocks for me, like you talk about with your computer being a little annoying, like even dealing with an SD card, like that's kind of a little bit annoying, right? And so all the little pieces of friction that I can get rid of have helped. So you want to order an iPad?
Yeah.
And I think that your point earlier about the reason why you use your iPad for certain scenarios, like it's like that, it's just leaning into that, right? Like maybe you don't use your iPad for everything, but in particular you might use it for some things, right? And so anything, especially things that require speed, right? So the more you can lean into that speed side of things to kind of like, well, Steve Jobs used to say, like, a computer's a bicycle for the mind. And an iPad is a great example of that for an artist, right? Like you have this bicycle for the mind, but for artists, it's a little bit different than like a traditional like keyboard and mouse would be. And in this case, the pencil goes a long way. So cool.
Yeah.
So there you have it. 3 people's opinions about what the iPad means to them. Now, for me, I obviously love my iPad, and I think that this is why I have a different perspective from a lot of the tech press. Federico Viticci is an interesting case because he wants to use his iPad, if you go to Mac Stories and see all of his coverage of the iPad as his full-time computer. He's an interesting case because he's leaned into the iPad as a full-time, but he wants to push it beyond. Now, I would argue, and this is what is leaning into Apple's best interests, is that in terms of their finances, is that a Mac and an iPad is not an unreasonable lift for a lot of people, right? If your computer is as important to you as I think it probably should be in most people's lives, then a laptop and an iPad as separate devices, it's not as crazy as you think. And in fact, for a lot of people, and this is true for me for a long time, you can get away with just the iPad. When I was a teacher, I really only used my iPad. In fact, I used my iPad for, I want to say 95% of my computing along with my phone. And then I used my Mac to fill in the gaps later on. And that's only because I was doing very particular things on my Mac, like programming and video editing at the time. And now video editing probably is taken care of relatively well on the iPad, at least compared to before. But in particular, coding is something that's still really mostly reserved for the Mac. Ultimately, today's announcements don't change that much, but I wanted to bring this up because the announcements today show that the hardware in particular does improve the software experience. There's a reason they brought the Procreate CEO up on stage to present the advancements in Procreate that come in relation to the improved Apple Pencil and the M4 chip in the iPad. And in particular, I want you to remember back to my sister's discussion of what she wants to do with her iPad and how, in particular, Procreate is one of the main selling points. It's a killer app for her as an artist. And actually, Anne as well also said that Procreate in a lot of ways is a killer app for the both of them. But even Lindsey mentioned that one of the things that she considered getting a Mac for before was because she didn't know if there was enough power on the iPad to support 3D modeling. Now, we just saw Apple today talk about a very advanced 3D modeling piece of software with their most advanced silicon on a tablet or desktop class device. So, as much as the tech press, as much as the people might want to make snarky comments about, the iPad OS being underpowered, it's not iPad OS. It's the fact that developers have not treated iPad as a serious computing platform, and probably also because the App Store has soured a lot of developers on the possibilities of what they can build for iPad, and a lot of those bad habits have rolled in for the last, how long has that iPad been around? 15 or so years almost now. So, big surprise coming from me saying that, number one, their iPad has its place. Number two, that the issue is not the operating system. It's mostly the apps. Now, there are a couple of exceptions, but it's mostly the apps. And number three, that app failure, that is Apple's ultimate failure in this case. It's not necessarily iPad OS. It's mostly an economic and cultural reality of what they have created with the app stores. But that's a story for another time. Thanks for watching.